So here we are with our final chapter of AMP2 lecture video that I'm going to do today. And we're going to cover the reproductive system. Now, we don't really give the reproductive system too much weight, unfortunately. We just sort of glaze over the important things. So we're going to focus a little bit on the anatomy because you need to know that for lab exam. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on the production of the spermatocytes and the oocytes, or the egg and sperm production in terms of meiosis and things like that. Along with a little bit of time on the female reproductive system and the hormone fluctuations and things like that to tie it back into the endocrine system, which is how we started the course. Okay, so we're going to explore the male and female reproductive anatomy, and then the male and female spermatogenesis and oogenesis, or the production of the gametes. So this is a side view, or a section showing the male reproductive system. And you'll notice how it starts at the bottom. So we're going to start at the bottom at the testes. Down here, there are two of them. And the testicles hang outside of the male's body in the scrotum. And you'll see there's this red structure here called the epididymis. And the testes is where the spermatogenesis happens, where the sperm are created. And the sperm will travel up this tube, and it gets a bunch of different names as it travels. So the beginning is called the vas deferens. And as it passes over the pubic bone, strangely up and around, through, or between the ureter and the bladder, right? We're still talking about the vas deferens. Once we hit this side, we hit the seminal vesicle, and they sort of come together here. The secretions from the seminal vesicle and the vas deferens come together here. We call this the ejaculatory duct. And this one is from the one testicle. This one right here is from the other testicle. And then we end up coming down through what's called the prostatic urethra, because this right here is the prostate gland. So this little section is called the prostatic urethra. This is the bulbourethral gland, and then we end up traveling down, and then we excrete from the body through what's called the spongy urethra. So a couple things of note. The testes are outside the male's body because viable sperm cannot be maintained at 98.6, so they're roughly about 3 degrees cooler outside the body. The testes are the primary reproductive organ in the male. This is just another image I was switching to. Again, you will notice that the sperm are going to pass from the testes up through the ductus deferens, over the pubic bone, around the bladder, downtown, where we're going to meet up with the seminal vesicle. The ejaculatory duct is here, and then the spongy urethra down and out through the end of the external urethral orifice from the penis. Now, for lab exam, you're going to want to know all of these different structures. You're going to want to know, over here, this gives you a little bit more detail. The underside, or the inferior side of the penis, is called the corpus spongiosum, the sort of blue with the dots. Then we have the corpus cavernosum on the top. So you need to know those two different tissue types in terms of, for anatomy and physiology, the lab portion. So again, another image, yet a third image, and this is going to show you the testicle with all the various layers of the tunics, so the connective tissues and supportive tissues, the artery, the vein, the nerve, etc. And then you're going to follow the ductus deferens up over the bladder again, and then you can see it on this side. Again, you know, we have the inguinal ring, we have the different cremaster muscles, right, the dartos muscle. There's all kinds of muscles and connective tissue support for the male reproductive system. Let's see. When we sort of look deeper into the testicle, you'll see here we have what are called seminiferous tubules, and this is where we have the spermatogenic cells happening within the testicle itself. Another image, again, testicle, right? The tube, the deferens. Here we have the the ampulla meeting up with the seminal gland, and it's going to, and here you can see right here is where the urine would come in as well. Now, it's obviously one or the other. The male is either producing or ejaculating sperm or urinating, right? But this is where the two components come together, and then using that urethral tube or the spongy urethra will be expelled. So again, just another image of it. Goodness, that was loud. Now, when we want to talk about sperm production in the males, now sperm production in the males is regulated by the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and various testicular hormones. I would take a minute and just review the processes of meiosis, right? Because here we're spending our time on the right-hand side of our screen. We're creating these haploid daughter cells, not daughter as in male, female, but daughter as in next generation. And we want to have a cell that has half the number of chromosomes so that when the egg and the sperm meet together, we have a full complement of chromosomes. So the hypothalamus is going to release, where are we? I'll go back here for a minute. So just making sure, again, that you can run through the stages of meiosis, understanding that when the cell gets to the end, it has half the number of chromosomes that it started with. There's not too many meiotic questions, but I want you to understand what we're creating here. So what is being created? So you're going to start up here, right? This is sort of the cross-section of a seminiferous tubule. It's called the basal lamina. This is where the sort of the, what are called cystinocytes, or these are going to be the sort of the basement cells, the stem cells that are going to become sperm down here. Now, so how does this happen? So this happens because the hypothalamus releases what's called gonadotropin releasing hormone. All right, so it's going to start way up here at the top. So the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone via the blood, right, to the anterior pituitary. Then the anterior pituitary is going to release FH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone, right, to stimulate the follicles, and LH, luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone is going to cause these cells to produce testosterone. So the FSH stimulates the spermatogenesis, and we're going to go back to that in a minute. The LH stimulates testosterone secretion, and that's going to sort of maintain the secondary sex characteristics of facial hair and thicker brow and broader shoulders, narrow hips, all those things that are traditionally seen as male. Those are the secondary sex characteristics. And so FSH and LH are released as a result of gonadotropin releasing hormone, hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, FSH, LH, spermatogenesis. Now, so the four important hormones. Gonadotropin releasing hormone causes the release of LH and FSH. LH causes the release of testosterone. So those four things work together for the male reproductive system. So what happens with the male reproductive system? So this is called spermatogenesis. See this right here? And spermatogenesis really has two subsections. We have spermiogenesis, which is when we're creating the sperm, and then we have the meiosis. And so the meiosis is when we have these stem cells, they are going to actively start to divide. And when they start to divide, we're going to end up with either a type A cell or a type B cell. The type A cell is going to always be a precursor. So this guy, this type B cell, is going to go on to become sperm. But this cell is always going to stay up here. So because males have the capability to produce sperm their entire mature adult life. So that happens because one spermatogonium divides in half, and one stays here, the other moves along. So as long as one continues to stay up here at the basal lamina, you're always going to have sperm production. So the type B cell is going to differentiate into a primary spermatocyte. It is going to undergo meiosis 1, then it's going to undergo meiosis 2, meaning we end up with 4 sperm for every 1 mitotically divided type B daughter cell. And then we end up at spermiogenesis. And spermiogenesis is the process that takes the cell and creates the sperm structure, which would be the head, right, and then the long tail. So this is called spermatogenesis. This is called spermiogenesis. But basically, it is when one cell divides, one of those divided cells becomes 4 sperm. The 4 sperm then are ready to be ejaculated, and then they use their swimmy tails to swim up the vaginal canal into the uterus and potentially up into the fallopian tube. So we'll get to that in a minute. So approximately takes about 24 days to go from cell to sperm, but that is constantly happening. So men are constantly producing sperm throughout their whole life. Basically, you'll see here, right, plasma testosterone. There's a little bit of testosterone that is released during development, right, to create the male primary sex organs, etc. And then again, there's a little bit of a boost about 9 or 10 months. Again, when you look at a baby, right, most of the time you can't tell if it's a male or female baby. But as of age 1 year old, you could look at a baby and say that's sort of a male going baby. This is a female going baby. So that happens as a result of this little boost of testosterone right before like the first birthday. And then, or right, about 6 months of age. And then again, somewhere around 11, 12, etc., all the way through to the end of days, right? You have sperm production basically from age 12 on. That's different for a female, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this is a side view of the female reproductive tract, and you'll see the bladder again, but what you don't see is any sort of tube wrapping around the bladder. The female reproductive tract is basically very linear. The uterus, the muscular uterus is here, the vaginal canal is here, and it's basically zip, zip. Where we encounter tubes is going to be when we look at this from a lateral angle here. So this is as though we're looking at, this is from the rear, but we have the uterus here. This is going to be the cervix here and the vagina here. Just like when men have 2 testes, women have 2 ovaries. And these ovaries with the associated uterine tube are basically the default position, right? Baby humans will tend to form this unless they are under the influence of testosterone. Under the influence of testosterone, right, the sex organs or the ovaries will descend into the scrotal sac. Those tubes will wrap around and come down. And then the external sex organs will sort of change shape as well. But basically, right, each male and female have 2 sex organs, 2 ovaries or 2 testes. So for women, there are 2 ovaries on the right and left side. The ovary is where the eggs are created. That's oogenesis. We have here, these are called the fimbriae. You can see that over here. And the fimbriae are sort of like little fuzzy fingers that will gather the eggs up into the uterine tube. They're not actually connected. The fimbriae just kind of rests on top. And when the egg is released, you can see that little egg right there. The egg is released, it's gathered up by the fimbriae, and it travels and rolls and travels and rolls all the way down here until it lands here. Now, when it lands here, if it is fertilized somewhere in here by the swimmy sperms, right? The sperm come up here and they go up here and they go up here and they're looking for an egg. If they find one, fertilization will happen and that embryo will tumble down and then stick to the wall of the uterus. If there's no fertilization, the egg just tumbles down, waits, nothing happens, then menstruation happens, everything is sloughed off, and the whole process starts again. So for men, you can produce sperm all day, every day for 75 years. Women can produce eggs only for about 40 years, and you get 1 egg per month. Left and right sides alternate. So January, February, March, April, May. So you have left and right sides switching off monthly to produce an egg, because that's how long it takes to produce an egg. So the female eggs are the limiting factor, usually, right? Male sperm, there's hundreds of millions of them every day. So what do you need to know? You need to know the ovary, the fimbriae, the uterine tube or fallopian tube, uterus, cervix, vagina. Another picture from another textbook, just giving you a picture. This also shows the suspensory ligament. It also shows this, let me pull it back here, the ovarian ligament, right? And also, so this is called the cardinal ligament. And so there's all kinds of the broad ligament, all kinds of things holding the female reproductive organs up in the lower pelvic cavity. Now, when we look at, this is sort of the exterior view of the female reproductive system from the mons pubis posteriorly to the anus, all the different openings to the various reproductive and urinary and excretory structures. This is a picture of the female breast and the adipose tissue and the different lactating structures for nursing babies. I don't spend a lot of time on this, but it's worth a look. This is a picture of a mammogram, right? And a film as to what it looks like if something's going wrong. It kind of gets that white, kind of calcified looking, cloudy look to it. And now we'll just go briefly over the events of oogenesis. So unlike males who have these stem cells right at that basal lamina that reproduce over and over again forever, women end up with their number of follicles by the time they are born. So notice the before birth. We have the oogonium into the primary oocyte, and the primary oocyte is arrested at birth. So when a woman or when a female baby is born, the ovaries in that female baby have all of the eggs for that baby's whole life. And when you're done with them, you're done with them. And if they come out and they're not great, your body's not making any more. It's a really interesting thing. So the ovaries inactive, however, all of the oocytes are present at birth. Now, every month following puberty to menopause from about age 12 to about age 40 or 50, you're going to produce an egg. Those eggs have been sitting there since you were a baby. So think about the fact that when, as men and women age, the chances for disorders becomes higher. Well, those eggs have been sitting there for 20, 30, 40 years just waiting. So there is something to having babies when you're younger. Your eggs are a lot more viable. Different story for a different day, but something to think about. So each month from puberty to menopause, the primary oocytes go through meiosis 1 and become secondary oocytes, and then they go through meiosis 2, and then they complete the cycle. Now, when we saw that one type B cell in males, that always gave rise to 4 sperm. We have 1 primary oocyte, and females will only get 1 egg out of that. So it's a much more limiting process than the male reproductive system. So we have a primordial follicle to a primary follicle, secondary follicle, right? This is as the egg is growing, where's the 1? That's a 7. As the egg is growing, I think that's supposed to be a 1. As the egg is growing and dividing, et cetera, we are also having this little follicle. And the follicle is where the egg is. It's like its own little home as it travels around the ovary until it gets released here as a secondary oocyte. But the follicle itself has important hormonal considerations. So basically, we're calling this oogenesis. Oogenesis creates the female gametes. We have all of our eggs, females have all their eggs when they're born. After puberty, a few oocytes are activated each month by FSH, and one will be selected to be the dominant follicle, sort of the best one. Now, from there, we end up with 1 egg. So we have 1 egg. He needs to meet up with 1 sperm. However, 1 egg is much more difficult to produce than all of these different sperms. Now, how does this happen? All right, it's very similar to what we had before. We have gonadotropin releasing hormone going down the anterior pituitary. We have FSH and LH being secreted. So far, that looks very similar to how this works in a male, male spermatogenesis. Male spermatogenesis. The difference is FSH is going to help with the maturation of the follicle stimulating hormone. That makes sense. LH is going to stimulate the thecal cells to produce androgens. The androgens are going to be estrogens and the progesterones and things like that. So the LH to testosterone in males, right, is going to also be sort of mirrored by the LH to estrogen and the androgen release in females to create that the release of the egg cell, or to create the creation of that egg cell. Now, so the early and mid follicular phases is when we have the GnRH, FSH, LH, and the estrogens. From there, the mature follicle is going to cause a positive feedback. We never see positive feedback. Positive feedback means we need more hormone. We have that LH surge and boom, ovulation. So it causes almost 2 releases of LH to get that egg released from the ovary, right? We have that initial LH release and the influence of the androgens, and then we have some estrogens are going to move that process along. The estrogens that are produced are going to cause that follicle to further stimulate the LH. And then boom, the egg is released. Now, once the egg is released, notice how we have all of these hormones. The corpus luteum is the follicle after the egg gets released. And the corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone, estrogens, and inhibin, and it is going to tell the hypothalamus to turn off. And we're going to start again. So it's a whole cycle. So if we look at this picture and then again this picture, we're going to be able to see the FSH and LH levels, which are called the gonadotropins. We're going to look and see the ovarian cycle, what's happening in the ovary, what's happening with the egg development. We're going to be able to see the hormone levels, the estrogens and the progesterones, what are happening with them. And then what is happening physically in the uterus, what's happening with the thickness and the layer of the uterus. So the menstrual phase is when the uterus is sloughing all of the lining. A woman has her period during this point. And at this point, the FSH and LH are pretty stable, right? The follicles are just kind of hanging out. The estrogens and progesterones are pretty stable. And then we have menstrual flow, and we've gotten rid of anything that didn't work when we were trying to make a baby last month. So let's try this again. So the female body never gives up. Every 28 or so days, it's like, okay, now we're going to have a baby. So if we're going to do that, let's make an egg. So the estrogen begins to rise, right? As the estrogens begin to rise, we begin to have thickening of the uterine lining again. And the uterine lining thickens because the embryo nestles itself in there, and it needs nutrients and blood and all of that. So here we have the FSH and LH are happening. Ovulation happens when we have that big surge in LH. Remember, we said we need to have that big LH surge. So ovulation happens. It causes that positive feedback. So this goes up, the egg comes out, right? Because we have that surge in the blood. And once that happens, it drops way down. Why does it drop way down? Because we are inhibiting, right? Once the egg comes out, the corpus luteum inhibits this process. So the egg comes out, the corpus luteum says, nope, shut it down, shut her down. But when these two guys get shut down, simultaneously, the estrogen has peaked, because remember, the estrogen has peaked. And at this point, that estrogen is going to fall. Now, when the estrogen begins to fall, the progesterone begins to peak, all right? And so we have the progesterone and the estrogen going up here. We're thickening. We're hoping that that egg is kind of fluttering down and is going to nestle itself right in here. LH and FSH, we don't need to worry about those because we already created the egg, right? So the egg is floating, hopefully going to nestle itself as an embryo. If it doesn't, day 28, everything sloughs off and we start again. Every single month, the female body prepares itself to get pregnant. Every single month. And then if it doesn't, it gets rid of everything and starts again. Same thing, right? The menstrual phase, we are getting rid of the uterine lining. Then we have the proliferative phase, where we have the LH and FSH, and we've created the egg, and now the estrogen and progesterone are going up, and now we have the lining is very, very, very thick. And right now, because this is when ovulation happened, this is when the egg, so this is when the egg is kind of floating around. Where's the egg? Is it meeting a sperm? Are we going to have an embryo or not? This is the summary of the hormones for estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. What do they do for males? What do they do for females? And sort of what they do, what are their metabolic effects, what are their neural effects, what are their effects on the organs, the feedback, all of that. So have an idea about these. Have an idea about the fact that there is a curve, the hormones, what they do. FSH and LH encourage the production of the egg. Estrogen and progesterone prepare the uterus. They all work together, right? And then if there's a sperm meeting an egg and an embryo, then it will nestle itself in the uterine lining. If it nestles itself in the uterine lining, what happens is the progesterone stays constant, and so the uterine lining stays constant. So that's what happens if there's actual pregnancy. All right, well, that is the end of our reproductive PowerPoint. Again, focus on the structures for lab exam, but focus on spermatogenesis and oogenesis and the associated hormones for your exam or for the final. Have a great day.